So we all know what Left 4 Dead is, right? And how it managed to stand the test of time without requiring a third installment into the game to keep the series popular. Well, regardless on how you look at it, the concept of having Left 4 Dead 3 is something I do see myself thinking about from time to time. Sure, both Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 have high replay value in my eyes, but I'd love to see something for the current generation. Something to stand tall following the success from the first two games. And then I remember it's Valve who made them. The company who no longer makes games, and when they did it really badly. So just imagine a scenario where Valve went bust and the IP for Left 4 Dead vanished into darkness, meaning we had no chance of ever getting Left 4 Dead 3. So what other games are there to look at? Well, we could look at Warhammer Vermintide, an interesting clone with some questionable mechanics, Earthfall, a basic copy that kinda went nowhere but with aliens, but what I want is zombies. And yes, there was Overkill's The Walking Dead, but that got cancelled and that's going nowhere. So what other zombie games are out there which are like Left 4 Dead, which can fill that itch? I really chop up a skin. World War Z is a 4-player cult zombie shooter which focuses on the struggle of 4 survivors trying to find a way to escape the oncoming horde of the undead. Whether that's just trying to escape a city, helping the military find a weapon to fight back the zombies, or trying to help a bunch of civilians escape the country. What baffles me about this game though is just how it kinda came out of nowhere. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for zombie games, but the film was roughly 6 years ago. It's not uncommon for a licensed game to come out of nowhere a few years after its release, but World War Z wasn't really what I'd class as a good film. I mean, there's bits of it which are enjoyable, but it's not what I desperately want to watch again. But regardless of that, it's here now, so let's have a quick look. At launch, World War Z consists of 2 game modes, a campaign and secondly, a player versus player multiplayer. Which is as crap as you'd expect, but we'll come back to that later. Let's first take a look at the main aspect of this game's content, which is the campaign. At launch, the game is packed with 4 separate stories being based in New York, Jerusalem, Moscow, and finally Tokyo. The concept of having new survivors for each campaign is definitely a welcome idea as it gives the world a bit more depth, but sadly due to the lack of time getting used to each character in the campaign, it all just falls a bit flat and you don't really have enough time to really understand and watch the group of survivors develop. But if you do want to know a little bit more about each character, after beating a level with each of them, you'll actually unlock a piece of lore that can be viewed in the collection screen. That gives a bit of backstory into the character just before the infection took place and during the start of the infection, and while it sounds like a brilliant idea, the clips that come with them are just a bit weird.
The Lord had other plans. I have made my peace with God.
I just want to note for the record, I didn't actually edit that in, that scream is intentionally there as part of the video. It's worth noting as well that there's no other collectibles to find in the game currently. There's snippets about the main levels in the campaign, but that's really it. It's not a problem, I just wish there was more to do in the campaign. Speaking of the campaign, World War Z currently only has a total of 4 campaigns, all containing 3 levels except Tokyo, which only contains 2, with a 3rd level supposedly coming in May. The levels themselves are a bit of a mixed bag at points. They're not short, but the structure themselves seems to be a bit all over the place, especially when certain campaigns appear just to have a theme following them. Take the first campaign for example. New York in my opinion seems to be the most fleshed out in the sense of direction and progression. You start off on the rooftops fighting your way through a shopping centre and then fighting your way down to a subway where you'll find a man who's completely insane who just acquired a train you need to find supplies from in return to take him to an evac location. But throughout the campaign you'll be halted at various points to hold a brief holdout to get to the next area. It's a basic Left 4 Dead formula, but it works. And then on the completely other end of the scale we have Jerusalem, where you need to help escort a scientist to a bunker to set up a remote laser satellite to help fight back the infection. The levels themselves look fine, but the friendly AI in this campaign is just so bad. They're incredibly weak and if one zombie attacks them they are immediately incapacitated, halting the entire objective, and if you're not careful they can go down out of bounds and you just have to restart the level. And this is a big problem this game has with the level design altogether. You're bound to see areas that you think you can enter and then there's just an invisible wall blocking your way, as these rooms are meant for the AI team to enter and leave you outside to deal with the rest. In my eyes, an invisible wall is just a really lazy attempt of level design and it looks horrible, especially when it's so frequent in the game. As for the rest of the level design, in most areas it's pretty good. Infected normally have a decent spawn point besides the odd occasion when you just see them appearing out of nowhere, but overall you'll have a decent idea of where to go and how to get there. Plus, it's definitely worth exploring the areas as you might find equipment that might come in handy later on, especially when it's equipment to use for a holdout section. Throughout the game you'll come to certain points where you'll need to stay put and wait a few minutes, but during that time obviously a horde is going to come your way. Instead of being something like Left 4 Dead where you only have your guns to fight with, in World War Z you have various deployables to use, and you can find them all over the place. These include things like barbed wire, electric traps, and also both manual and automatic turrets. And while I do love the idea of having deployables for your defense, I do have one slight issue with them. The game is very restrictive with these traps. Instead of being able to snap them into place on a grid-like system or just freely place them anywhere, you only have specific spots you can place them, and half the time these locations aren't really ideal. For example, you might place down an automatic turret to clear out a certain spawn point of infected, but on that occasion the RNG just isn't working in your favour and the zombies will spawn elsewhere. And what makes matters more irritating is that once you've placed an equipment, you can't pick it back up. Besides the traps though, you will be able to find various weapons in the world to choose from. You'll have stuff like your standard formula of rifles, SMGs, pistols and so on. But the weapons themselves are split into 3 different tiers alongside some heavy weapons. Heavy weapons however fall under their own category as ammo can't be replenished with these and work similar to power weapons in games like Halo. One thing I do love about this game however is the majority of primary and secondary weapons can actually be upgraded. At the end of each level, depending on if you win or lose, you'll be given a certain amount of XP for how far you get through the level. This will go towards your class, but you'll also get some XP for your weapons depending on what weapons you've used and also how many kills you've got with said weapon. When it comes to the weapons, you'll have a total of 5 different levels to power through. Each will upgrade various things like mag size, accuracy, stability, and more importantly damage. Sometimes as well you might get the ability to equip a silencer on your gun, making levels slightly easier for drawing less attention to yourselves before striking a horde. As for the classes however, it's a little bit different. You'll have several to choose from that will add various minor gameplay adjustments to the game, being either passive or ability perks. Currently I've only really played around with 2, but there's multiple classes like the medic, the grenadier, a gunslinger, and my personal favourite, a melee specialist. All of these classes will have very minimal upgrades to keep the game balanced, ranging from things like less friendly fire damage, to overall health, to upgrading your equipment or starting with a higher tier weapon. Or sometimes you can actually start with a power weapon that'll also upgrade all the power weapons for yourself in the map. These skills however work on a really weird system. You'll sometimes get skills you have to use regardless, while other skills will actually be in rows of 3, with the option of only being 1 equipped at a time. Which is fine, but how you unlock these skills is really dragged out. The max level in a class is 30 as you unlock each skill 1 at a time. So for a row of 3 skills, you have to unlock them 1 by 1, and then buy each skill 1 by 1 with supplies that you find at the end of a match. I'm guessing what they're trying to do is pad out the game to make it feel longer, but it begs the question of why. You have all these classes which are fairly basic anyway, and they don't need to be level 30. Plus, you don't even need to be level 1 to beat a level on the hardest difficulty in this game, as it falls more onto the weapon levels in general. So why not just unlock all 3 skills at once and then have to buy them separately afterwards? Finally, while I do love the melee focused class, in this game it is so underrated as there's only 2 different melee weapons in the game currently. The first one being a machete, or a crowel if you have the DLC, and then a chainsaw. Both work really well, don't get me wrong, but I'd rather have a bit more variety into the melee choices. Also, in the character selection screens there's a character with a fire axe, and there isn't a fire axe as a melee weapon in the game. So why is there a model of it if it is never being used? It just seems a bit pointless. Overall however, the main supply of weapons in this game are fine, but if you're going to have a melee focused class, you need to give the player a bit more variety to choose from, not just a reskin and a pre-order bonus. Going back to the campaigns as a whole for a moment, there's one other problem I have with it, and that is the pacing. It really doesn't make a lot of sense at times, especially with the endings to some of the levels. Take the finale of Moscow for example. You'll end up rigging a machine that releases a deadly gas into the streets to take back the city later on. But during the ending you're fighting a non-stop horde of infected, but what happens when you finish the machine and release the gas? Well, the infected just kind of vanish from the room, and that's it, the campaign's over. You've released the nerve gas and in 6 months you'll be able to take back the city. As for what happens to the infected in that room, or the 4 survivors, fuck if I know, there's no explanation after that. That's it. Besides all of that, I honestly don't know what to tell you. I could try and word this 100 different ways, but the core of World War Z is just your standard Left 4 Dead formula. Hell, even the special infected are very similar. You've got the hunter known as a lurker, a boomer, sort of. Instead of covering you in vomit, it just kind of spreads gas upon death, hence the name gas bag. The bull, which is basically the charger, and then finally the only unique one in this game being a screamer. Out of the 4 special infected we have in the game currently, the only ones I really have a problem with have to be the screamers and the lurkers. The lurkers tend to spawn in dark areas of the map waiting to strike, but instead of spawning out of bounds and running to these dark locations, 9 times out of 10 the lurker just kind of spawn there abruptly, and unless you're moving away from them, you can't block them pouncing you. It doesn't help that sometimes, depending on your connection to the server, the lurker will actually just spawn on top of you, giving you a few seconds to notice and kill them, otherwise he'll just immediately grab you, and worst of all, if you melee him, it doesn't stun him, so unless you run, there is no hope of stopping that thing from grabbing you. As for the screamer, however, the idea of him is fine and he actually works really well in game. He'll end up causing a horde to keep appearing as long as he screams, but on occasion he'll end up spawning outside the map or in an area you've just left that is now blocked off thanks to an invisible wall. And the problem here is that they don't despawn. Ever. Meaning if this is an area that you can't see from a distance, or you've just left an area from the start of the game and they're still alive, they just keep going and that horde will keep coming non-stop. Which I could argue is a nice challenge in a way, but if you're playing on the hardest difficulty, this goes from being a challenge to just a pain in the ass. As for the gas bag and bull, they're pretty much fine how they are. I rather like how the bull takes forever to kill unless you manage to hit him in the back, and the gas bag is really easy to take care of, especially when you figure out how to stop him leaking upon death. But most of all, I'm really surprised how well the common infected work in this game. More specifically, how well the devs managed to pull off the optimization for a horde. In case you've not seen the film this is based off, in World War Z the horde works similar to something like Left 4 Dead. A massive group of zombies will be sprinting at you, but instead imagine a horde in Left 4 Dead amplified to 10. Or 11 if you want to go overkill. The hordes themselves are massive, and just like in the movie, they'll bunch up together like a stream crashing through the streets and bulking up together to climb up to buildings to reach you. And when I first heard this was going to be a thing, I was expecting one of the 2 outcomes to happen. It would either be a buggy mess with it breaking constantly, or worse, the game would just be screeching to a halt with massive frame drops. But to my surprise, it works, and it works incredibly well. It's definitely one of my favourite parts of this game. You think you're in control of a situation, mowing down the oncoming swarm of zombies, when another one of your teammates isn't really keeping an eye on a certain entrance, and within seconds the game can go from being a stable situation to a full-on clusterfuck. Funnily enough, it actually reminds me of one of the last scenes from Dead Set, when the infected break into the studio and within seconds everything goes to hell and everybody's dying. Bonus points for anybody who actually watched that show besides me. Also, if you have a Netflix account, Dead Set is on there, so it's worth a watch. It's only like 5 episodes. At the core of the game, World War Z has the premise to be an amazing game, and yes, if you want to go there, this is definitely one of the better Left 4 Dead clones released in recent years. But unfortunately, there are some things that just holds this game back. Firstly, the game is lacking some core options you'd expect from a 4-player co-op game. More importantly, a friends-only match is not a thing in this game. At the time of writing this, you are always forced into a public match unless you have 3 other friends to play with, and what doesn't help is you can't create a new match either. So there is a high chance if you're playing with 1 or 2 friends that you're just going to be dragged into someone else's lobby which is halfway through into the campaign. So there's a high chance that your first playthrough you're just going to join most missions halfway into the game, which for a first playthrough that is not ideal. Not only that, there's been several major issues with the game since launch, as well as the matches would just randomly disconnect, or worse, crash for no reason. The servers would randomly go offline, and apparently from what I've been told, a bunch of people can't even invite their friends into the party, pretty much ruining the game for them. And if you've not noticed, there is a black bar at the bottom of this screen, and there is a reason to why. For some odd reason in this game, it is showing a debug menu and it shows all the stats of like IP addresses, user IDs, all that kind of stuff at the bottom, which I don't want any of you to know, so I have to block that regardless. Now you might be wondering, it's a 4-player co-op game, why did I just say that the server would randomly disconnect? When ideally it should be peer-to-peer. And you're right, this should be a peer-to-peer game. But I do have one idea why it isn't, and that would be the second game mode in this game, which is PvP. And to keep things blunt, PvP in this game is utter shit. Do you happen to remember a game called Homefront? Not the sequel, rather the first game back on the Xbox 360. Well, do you remember the multiplayer for that game? Yeah, it was a tacked on Call of Duty clone, and well, World War Z's PvP is exactly that. It's a rather generic game mode that's tacked onto the base game. It feels like they've done this to kind of pad out the game to make it look bigger, but it really doesn't suit the game. Why make it humans versus humans? Why not make it humans versus infected like Left 4 Dead? Or better yet, why didn't you make the second game mode of this game a survival survival mode. With how the Horde deployment system works in this game, it screams for the option of a survival mode. I'm convinced that the PvP side of this game won't last very long post-launch, and I wouldn't be surprised if the developers just never add any new content to it. Not that I want them to anyway, I want this thing to die. The game works better as a co-op game anyway, so for the love of God just stick with that. Or make survival a thing, either is fine, just fucking ignore PvP and let it die out. Finally, as for the game altogether, I personally think World War Z is a great game, but it feels so half done and leaves me wanting so much more.
And hopefully we do get more content down the line. Just not PvP. And perhaps not all paid DLC.
So yeah, definitely call me skeptical. When I first found out about this game, especially after Overkill's The Walking Dead, I was definitely hesitant, but honestly I'm surprised. Not only is it a really good zombie game and a good Left 4 Dead clone, it took the one good thing about this film and really made it something special. I'm so glad it didn't take the plot though, because this film is absolutely shit. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Sir Crackerbulb, and I hope you have a cracking week. Goodbye.